All right, I want to continue on my critique of psychology. Today, let's consider the question: which is more valuable, or which is more important? Truth or health? Truth or health? And if you ask that to a psychologist, I think the psychologist would tell you health, maybe. But I think they would tell you health. Did they determine that through a scientific experiment? You notice I asked that question time and time again. And it has to be asked over and over again. They claim to be scientists. If they claim to be scientists, I have to ask the question: do they have a proof through scientific experiment? No. They can't prove that health is more important than truth. How could they possibly come up with an experiment to determine whether health is more important than truth? But they would most certainly say health. For example, let's say Adolf Hitler was suffering from depression. Well, I think we all assume he must have been suffering from something. Like he's got some kind of thing, something wrong with his mind to do the things that he did. If we ask Adolf Hitler, or if we ask a psychologist, and a psychologist, had Adolf Hitler before him in a whatever they call it, session, would the psychologist seek to make Adolf Hitler happy? I think that he would. When in fact, what he or she, I'll say she, what she should do is not seek Adolf Hitler's happiness, because that would be unjust. That'd be unjust, I should say. That'd be unjust. It'd be injustice, right? Truth and justice, I would argue, matter more than health. It's better that some of us are not healthy psychologically. Adolf Hitler does not deserve health. Can a psychologist answer this question? I don't think a psychologist can. And yet the psychologist would assume that Adolf Hitler should become healthy. And I can think of a counter-argument immediately. Someone might say, well, the psychologists, their purpose is not to determine that question, the answer to that question. The purpose of the psychologist is simply to figure out how to make someone more healthy. But immediately, that counter-argument I can rebut and say, okay, is it the point? Is that the purpose of the psychologist? And is that purpose a scientific purpose? Is that... can you demonstrate scientifically that is the end towards which a psychologist should point herself? So then, if you cannot, that is not science, right? You can't prove that through a scientific experiment. But that is the end towards which a psychologist points, not through science, but by some other means. I assume through philosophy, but the psychologist is not trained in philosophy. And so that premise is essentially a major premise, or at least a first principle, that now becomes a part of everything that the psychologist does. The psychologist's choices are based on this premise. And so as they make decisions about what I should do, what I should not do, and as they make decisions about what the patient should do or should not do, this question of health is presumed And so then every cognition, every maladaptive schema, as they call it, let's just go with every schema, should point at this thing called health. Every schema should point at health. But this is not a scientific answer at all. This is a philosophical answer. And moreover, here's the question I really have. Should a person point their cognition, should a person point their cognitive schema towards truth or adaptiveness? Let us say that it is more adaptive to behave in a certain way, but that way of behaving is not aligned with truth. Which do you choose? Truth or health? See, this for those of you who are not aware, and I'm not claiming to be an expert here, but I think I'm knowledgeable enough to say, and I think any psychologist would say the same that I'm about to say, is that what you try to do in cognitive psychology is to create, in clinical cognitive psychology, is to ensure that the cognitions are pointed towards something adaptive. And adaptive versus maladaptive means, so a maladaptive schema, which is very common in your language, is when your thoughts, your thought patterns, do not adapt you to your particular environment. But what if your thought patterns are true? What if truth leads you to be depressed? Which matters more, truth or health? The psychologist will answer health, but upon what basis? Science? No. It's not based on science at all. This is a philosophical question. They do not study philosophy at all. There's actually a certain realm that claims to existential psychology, I guess they call it. I guess you could maybe give them a little bit of leeway, perhaps. I don't know. But the reason why you put your faith and invest your faith in the psychologists is because you believe that they're scientists, right? I don't see you guys investing your faith in Aristotle. For some reason, people don't give the same respect to philosophers. And that's kind of a good thing, I think. You should never invest your faith in anybody based on just their title. I don't care if they're a philosopher or a scientist. There are many philosophers who are terrible philosophers, just dreadful philosophers out there. So certainly, one should not just invest faith into a philosopher. So at least there's some health in that realm, and that we don't, just buy into whatever anybody says because they're a philosopher, but yet we buy into whatever they say because they're a scientist. Why are you guys doing that? And moreover, what these people are practicing is not science. I'm pointing this out time and time again. First, these clinical psychologists are asking questions of ought. That is not science. Second, they are constructing categories. Has nothing to do with experimentation or the scientific method. Categories is a thing that we've studied for centuries, built on Aristotle. Third, now, is this idea that a cognition should be pointed at what is adaptive, and that's the only concern. Like if you read these books, they're always like, well, this schema is maladaptive versus adaptive. Is anybody stopping to ask themselves whether the cognition is true or not? What if the cognition is not true? And that really is it. They will examine. I mean, if you go to see a psychologist, I believe this is what they will do under the cognitive theory. Is they will ask you, well, what are your beliefs? At least they won't say it that way, but they will try to determine what your beliefs are. And they'll examine your beliefs, and they'll say, well, there are alternative beliefs that you could have. You could choose these alternative beliefs. And who's to say the alternative beliefs are not true? And so then they'll say, well, with all these beliefs before you, this belief could be true, this belief could be true, this belief could be true. Pick the belief that brings you the greatest happiness. Always pick the belief that brings you the greatest happiness. But I ask myself, which one brings you the greatest truth? And if that were posed to the psychologist, which should you pursue, health or truth? I think they would say health. I would say courageous is the person who chooses truth. Well, that's my thoughts for the day. Maybe I'll think more about that, or maybe comment on it more later. Give some thought to it. Maybe, put your comments down below if you have any thoughts. I guess it'd be interesting to see what you guys have to say. I'm open to having a conversation here, or a debate.